What is up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja. Now that we're a little over halfway done with the first season of The Last of Us, I thought I would give my mid-season review. So without further ado, let's rock. So a couple of things before we get started. I don't know if you can hear it, my voice, but I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so hopefully that's not super distracting. Also, I'm not going to talk about or put anything in this video that I personally would consider a spoiler. However, I know that there's some people out there that are a little bit more sensitive than I am to spoilers. So if you are super sensitive to spoilers, I would suggest just watching the first 5 episodes. That's all I'm going to cover in this video because that's all we have so far, and then coming back to the video. Also, if you're looking for a deep dive into the first episode, I actually did a separate review of the first episode when it was released. So we're not gonna really talk that much about the first episode other than a tiny bit here in a little bit. But if you're looking for a deep dive of the first episode, definitely check out my review. Speaking of the first episode, I think that it's kind of a perfect microcosm of the show as a whole. I've said this before, The Last of Us is one of my favorite video games of all time, and I think that it's one of the best, if not the best, video game story ever told. But if you're just gonna do a recap, beat for beat, of the story in the video game, then what's the point of having this series outside the financial gains? And while I do think the series is super faithful to the story in the video game, which shouldn't be super surprising because Neil Druckmann, the guy that created the games, is also kind of co-show running the series, I do think because of just the nature of video games, unless you're a Metal Gear Solid game, you can't have 45-minute cutscenes. The video game story does leave gaps in some character development and some plot holes that I think the series does a really good job of exploring, because the video game just, you have to get back to the gameplay. And I do think that the show has done a really good job of filling in those gaps. In the first episode, we got to see that right away with Sarah. They give a little bit more flavor to that character. That being said, I don't agree that all the changes were for the best. My logical part of my brain understands why they did away with the spores. It was definitely a video gamey thing where it's like you would go into a particular area, you would see the spores in the air, and then you would put on your gas mask. And it was kind of used for a way in the game for Joel to believe Ellie that she wasn't infected even though she was bitten. So I totally understand that, but it also doesn't make logical sense, because if the spores are in the air and the infection is airborne, it wouldn't just be contained to a small area. You'd have to wear your gas mask all the time, because if it's airborne, it's airborne. It's not gonna be contained in one small area, because that's not how air works. That being said, I could not get over how goofy the shit coming out of their mouths looked. It made me chuckle every single time. And I'm just a little nervous how the hive mind thing is gonna affect the show moving forward. They do something very similar to like the Upside Down in Stranger Things, where if you step on a vine, the mind flayer can communicate where you're at. And I just don't know how that's gonna work later on in the series. But honestly, that is really my only complaint with the show so far. I love how well it's paced. The first 2 episodes are action-packed and very faithful to the game. And then the 3rd episode definitely slows down the series, but I say that in the best way possible. It's almost like making a playlist. You can't have all bangers, because then you don't appreciate how banging the bangers are. You have to throw in a few acoustic songs in there to kind of slow things down. And the 3rd episode definitely did that. And the 3rd episode was a perfect example of something that I said earlier. The Bill and Frank relationship is kind of left open-ended in the game. However, in the show, they were able to really dive deep into that relationship. And I really appreciated how they trusted the audience to get what was happening without actually explicitly telling us what happens. There is an expression in filmmaking that says, show them, don't tell them. And it's a huge pet peeve of mine when a filmmaker doesn't trust the audience to understand what's happening and just has a character explicitly tell the audience what's happening. And I loved that they trusted the audience to understand, to pick up what was happening by just the way that Bill drank his wine. I just thought it was so good. It was chef's kiss. I loved it. So after we were done with the detour that is the third episode, as much as I really enjoyed the third episode, I was happy to get back to Joel and Ellie, because at the end of the day, The Last of Us is Joel and Ellie's story. Not only with the fourth episode did we get back to Joel and Ellie, but we also got back to more action-packed episodes. As soon as they started driving away in Bill's truck, I was like, man, are they gonna crash? Like, is that gonna happen? And we had to wait a little bit for that, but we ultimately were not disappointed. In every episode, it seemed like they took something from the game and made it better in the series. So in the game, they crash and are attacked by bandits or hunters in Pittsburgh. In the show, it's Kansas City. I don't care about the city change. That doesn't matter to me. But in the game, the bandits or hunters aren't really developed. And I think that they did a really good job of kind of doing a deep dive into that group in the series versus the game. The group is led by Kathleen, who is a completely original character for the series. It's played by Melanie Lynskey. And overall, I thought the casting in this show was amazing. Of course, I love Pedro Pascal. I think I said this in my review of the first episode. He's pitch perfect for Joel because Pedro Pascal has a very, what I would describe as an expressive face. Joel is a very strong and silent type of character, and you kind of have to tell a lot without actually physically saying words. And I think Pedro Pascal does that really well. It did take me a couple episodes to warm up to Bella Ramsey's Ellie, but after those first couple episodes, I think she does a great job. Of course, I'm a big fan of Nick Offerman. His Bill is fantastic. They even have a few actors from the video game come back for the series, which I thought was really, really cool. But if I'm being honest, I didn't really love Kathleen. And I thought her casting was a bit of a swing and a miss for the show. That was until the fifth episode. They really dug deep into her character in that episode, and you really start to understand where she and her group are coming from. And I always think that that makes for the best villains. When you start to empathize and maybe even sympathize with the villains, that makes them much more interesting characters. And I think Melanie Lynskey did a phenomenal job with Kathleen in the fifth episode. And I haven't even got to Henry or Sam yet. And I know I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but again, it feels like every single episode, they were determined to take something that worked really well in the game, like Henry and Sam, and just kind of add a cool layer to it. Give them some cool character development. Among other things, I loved that they made Sam deaf, and an extra cool layer is he's played by Cavion Woodyard, who is deaf in real life, so I thought that was an added bonus. Plus, kind of a cherry on top to the fifth episode, we got a really cool sniper scene, which is one of my favorite moments to play in the game. Well, there you have it, folks. Those are my thoughts on the first 5 episodes of the Last of Us HBO series. Of course, the video game set the bar super, super high. But as long as the show can stick the landing on the last few episodes, I think we have, in my opinion, the best video game adaptation we have ever seen. But of course, those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. Are you enjoying the series so far? Type Y for yes, N for no. And if you've made it this far, please do me a favor and smash that like button, as the kids say, and consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, ding that bell. That way you're notified every time I post a video. I post weekly gaming related content, so if you're interested in that, definitely consider subscribing and dinging that bell. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy, and we were just talking and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?